At Arlington, a former U.S. president demanded a tomb guard salute him. He expected obedience. He didn't know the silent guard answered to a power older than any president, duty. He was about to be humbled. The air at Arlington National Cemetery carried a weight that was more than just humidity. It was the collective gravity of a nation's sacrifice, a sacred silence that commanded reverence from all who entered its gates. Into this profound quiet, the convoy arrived, a fleet of jet-black SUVs with tinted windows and diplomatic plates, parting the respectful crowds with an air of imported, unapologetic importance. The lead vehicle, a reinforced Cadillac, purred to a stop. The door opened, and out stepped Donald Trump. At 78, the former president moved with the same unmistakable swagger that had defined his public life. He wore a perfectly pressed navy overcoat, his signature red tie a slash of defiant color against the cemetery's muted greens and grays. He adjusted his collar, scanning the hallowed grounds not with the awe of a pilgrim, but with the appraising eye of a real estate developer sizing up a new property. "Still doing the whole medieval cosplay thing, huh?" he remarked to one of his aides, his voice carrying easily in the still air. Nearby, a military family laying flowers at a loved one's grave flinched. "You'd think with all this prime real estate, they'd modernize a little. Get some real security instead of these guys in costumes." The British diplomatic staff escorting him exchanged perfectly polite but deeply pained glances, a look honed by years of managing international incidents. They said nothing. Across the expansive gravel courtyard, at his ceremonial post before the tomb of the unknown soldier, stood Sergeant Jonathan Parr of the 3rd U.S. Infantry Regiment. At 38, he was a specimen of military perfection. His dress blue uniform was so sharply creased it looked like origami. His boots were polished to a black mirror, reflecting the overcast sky. His eyes, fixed straight ahead, held the 1,000-yard stare of a man trained to see through distractions, through time itself. But Jonathan Parr wasn't a statue. He was a combat veteran. Before earning the immense honor of guarding the tomb, he had served 2 tours in Afghanistan. He had held a position during a Taliban ambush outside of Kandahar, refusing to abandon his post until every member of his platoon was evacuated. He had been commended for exceptional composure under fire. His stillness was not theatrical, it was forged in places where an uncontrolled movement meant death. Trump's gaze landed on him. He saw not a combat hero, but a prop for his own ongoing performance. "That one," Trump said, gesturing toward Parr with the casual point of a man ordering from a menu. "Let's see if he knows who's boss." His aide, a young man already calculating the number of apology calls this would require, paled. "Sir, this isn't part of the schedule. He's not supposed to." But Trump was already moving, striding off the designated visitor path, his entourage scrambling to keep up. The tourists' phones, which had been respectfully lowered, rose in a synchronized digital wave. Everyone could sense it, a boundary was about to be crossed. Trump stopped a few feet from Parr, close enough to make it personal. "Now that," he announced, projecting his voice for the growing audience, "is some outfit. Tremendous. Very theatrical." He circled Parr slowly, like a predator inspecting its prey. "You know, in the States, soldiers salute their commanders," Trump continued, a smirk playing on his lips. "I've been saluted by the best. Generals, Marines, Navy SEALs. Tremendous respect. I'm a former commander-in-chief. Still am, to a lot of people." He looked directly at the motionless guard. "So go ahead. Show some respect. Salute me. That's an order." The words, a direct order from a former commander-in-chief, hung in the sacred air, a flagrant violation of every protocol governing this hallowed space. The crowd froze. The gentle murmur of tourists and rustling leaves was replaced by a tense, suffocating silence. Phones were still raised, but the expressions behind them had shifted from curious amusement to a deep, collective discomfort. They were no longer watching a celebrity spectacle, they were witnessing a desecration. Sergeant Parr did not move. He did not blink. He did not even seem to breathe. His posture remained as unyielding as the marble tomb he guarded. It wasn't an act of defiance. It was an act of supreme discipline. His training was absolute. He was a sentinel. His duty was to the tomb, and to the unknown soldiers within it. Nothing else existed. Trump, unaccustomed to being ignored, felt a flush of irritation. His smirk tightened. What, nothing? Is he frozen? Is this guy on strike or something? He said, turning to his entourage with a gesture of mock disbelief. An American tourist near the rope line, likely trying to be helpful, called out, "He's not going to move, sir." That's the whole point. I get the point, Trump snapped back, his voice sharper now. His gaze returned to Parr, and this time it was a glare. The performance was over, his ego was now engaged. You think you're better than me? You think this uniform makes you untouchable? He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a growl. I said, salute me. Now. The silence that answered him was more powerful than any retort. It was an active, disciplined void that seemed to absorb his anger and render it impotent. It was in this silence that another voice emerged, quiet but clear. It came from an elderly woman in the crowd, her coat adorned with a gold star pin. He's not ignoring you, she said, her voice trembling with a quiet fury. He's honoring my son. The one who never came home. His duty is to him, not to you. The comment rippled through the crowd, a wave of understanding and sympathy. The public sentiment, which had been uncertain, now solidified squarely behind the silent guard. They understood. Trump did not. For Sergeant Parr, the former president's voice was just another sound to be filtered out, like the distant traffic or the cry of a bird. His mind was a fortress, built and fortified by years of training. But inside that fortress, a memory stirred. It was not a memory of combat, but of his selection for the old guard. The final interview with the regimental sergeant major, a man whose face was a leathery mask of hard-won wisdom. Parr, the old soldier had said, your job here will be to stand against everything the modern world throws at you. Noise. Distraction. Disrespect. Ego. You will be a rock. You will be a symbol of a promise that our nation made to its fallen. You are not just a guard, you are a guardian of that promise. You will not falter. Parr stood on the plaza, the weight of that promise on his shoulders. The man shouting at him was just another distraction, another piece of noise trying to breach the walls of his duty. His resolve was absolute. He would not falter. He would be the rock. As the standoff intensified, a new figure emerged from a side gate of the palace, moving with a measured urgency. She was a tall woman in an impeccably pressed Royal Navy uniform, her rank identifying her as a major. This was Major Caroline Brooks, of the Royal Household Protocol Office. She was a woman whose entire career was dedicated to managing situations exactly like this, where political egos clashed with centuries of unbending tradition. She had been alerted by palace security the moment Trump had broken from his designated tour group. Watching on a monitor, she had assessed the situation with the cool, practiced eye of a bomb disposal expert. She saw the volatile element, a former world leader with a notoriously fragile ego, accustomed to commanding any room he entered. She saw the unmovable object, a highly trained ceremonial guard, whose duty was literally to be unmovable. And she saw the detonator, a growing crowd of onlookers with smartphones, broadcasting this diplomatic car crash to the world. Her plan was not to confront Trump's power with more power. That would only lead to an explosion. Her strategy was to de-escalate, not by yielding, but by using a force even Trump couldn't argue with, the intricate, unassailable logic of protocol. She would not engage him on politics or personality. She would engage him on the rules of the house he was visiting. As she walked across the courtyard, she gave quiet, clipped orders to the palace security staff through a discreet earpiece, planning her intervention like a military maneuver. She instructed them to create a wider, more formal perimeter around the scene, subtly boxing Trump in, making his transgression even more obvious. She had an aide ready to brief the press with a carefully worded statement about standing protocols for all visiting dignitaries. She observed the crowd, her intelligence-gathering mind noting the shift in their demeanor. They were no longer just curious tourists. They were now a jury, and they were siding with the guard. The old veteran who had spoken up, the Gold Star Mother's comment, these were crucial data points. The moral high ground had been established, and it was not on Trump's side. Her approach was perfectly timed. She waited for Trump to escalate his demands one last time, to a point where his behavior was undeniably and publicly unreasonable. When he started questioning the guard's patriotism, she knew it was time to act. She did not rush. She walked with a calm, deliberate pace that was, in itself, a statement of authority. Her plan was to intercept, to redirect, and to re-establish the boundaries that had been so flagrantly ignored. She was not there to scold a former president, but to remind him, with impeccable British politeness, that in this place, the only authority that mattered was that of the crown and its ancient traditions. Her intervention would be the beginning of the end of his performance. Major Caroline Brooks reached Trump's side, her presence a sudden, calming force in the tense atmosphere. She offered a polite but unmistakably firm nod. "Mr. Trump," she said, her voice carrying that distinctly British quality of being perfectly courteous while simultaneously ending all debate. "I'm Major Brooks, from the Royal Household Protocol Office. On behalf of the palace, I must ask that you return to the designated viewing path." Trump, momentarily thrown off by this new, authoritative figure, tried to pull her into his world, to make her part of his show. "Just admiring the setup here, Major," he boomed, flashing a grin. "Great costumes, amazing posture. I had tea with the Queen, you know. Tremendous lady." Major Brooks did not smile. "Sir, the Coldstream Guards are not actors. They are serving members of His Majesty's Armed Forces, and this is an active ceremonial post. Your proximity is in violation of standing protocol." "Standing protocol," Trump scoffed, his eyebrows raised. "I've been saluted by kings and generals, Major. Don't tell me I can't talk to a man in a bearskin hat." This was the opening she had waited for. Her reply was a masterpiece of psychological warfare, a verbal strike delivered with the precision of a surgeon. "And yet, sir," she said, her voice still perfectly level, "I imagine none of them needed to be told twice." A ripple of stifled laughter and appreciative murmurs went through the crowd. The barb, wrapped in silk, had found its mark. For the first time, Trump looked genuinely flustered. He had been publicly outmaneuvered. The crowd was no longer just watching, they were now firmly on the side of the quiet, disciplined authority represented by Major Brooks and Sergeant Parr. Trump tried to recover, pivoting back to the guard, his voice taking on a desperate, hectoring tone. "All I said was, salute me. You'd think I insulted the crown jewels." Before Major Brooks could reply, Sergeant Parr made his first and only physical counterattack. It was not a violent move. It was a subtle, almost imperceptible shift. He repositioned his rifle, lifting it just slightly and settling it again against his shoulder. The movement was a perfectly executed drill, accompanied by a soft, clean click of metal and leather. To a civilian, it meant nothing. To any soldier, and to Trump who had spent years around them, the message was unmistakable. It was a nonverbal period at the end of a sentence. It was a soldier's way of saying, "This conversation is over." The psychological effect was profound, a final, silent rejection of Trump's demands, delivered in the language of pure, unadulterated military discipline. The small, precise click of Sergeant Parr's rifle hung in the air, a sound more final than any shout. Trump, who had been gearing up for another verbal barrage, stopped mid-thought. He stared at the guard, finally understanding that he was communicating with a man who spoke a different language entirely, a language of duty, not dialogue. The standoff had reached its endgame. And then, Parr spoke. He did not turn his head. He did not break his forward gaze. His voice was not loud, but in the dead silence of the courtyard, it carried with the force of a judgment. "This uniform," he said, his tone firm, unwavering, and utterly impersonal, "does not answer to ego." The words hit the courtyard like a thunderclap. It was a simple sentence, yet it was a complete and total demolition of Trump's entire position. It wasn't an insult, it was a statement of fact, a declaration of a code so ancient and powerful that the demands of a single, powerful personality were simply irrelevant. Trump's mouth opened, then closed. No response came. For perhaps the first time in his public life, he was left truly speechless. His entire arsenal, bravado, intimidation, claims of authority, had been rendered useless against a simple, profound truth. In that moment of stunned silence, another sound began to rise. A young boy in the crowd, no more than 10 years old, who had been watching with wide, serious eyes, slowly raised his small hand to his forehead in a clumsy but earnest salute. He wasn't saluting the former president. He was saluting the guard. The gesture was contagious. The boy's mother, smiling through tears, did the same. Then the old British veteran with the poppy pin on his blazer. Then 2 American tourists, who quietly lowered their phones and stood a little straighter. One by one, a dozen, then 24 people along the rope line turned their full attention to Sergeant Parr, offering their own silent tribute. They were no longer a passive audience. They had chosen a side. They had voted, not with ballots, but with their respect. This was the checkmate. The power in the courtyard had completely and irrevocably shifted. The moment no longer belonged to Donald Trump. It belonged to the silent man in the red tunic, the man who hadn't moved, who hadn't flinched, who had won a battle without ever throwing a punch. Trump looked around the courtyard, at the faces of the people watching, and saw that he had become irrelevant. They were no longer looking at him. They were looking at the guard. His aide, sensing the finality of the defeat, stepped forward and whispered urgently in his ear. "Mr. Trump, the motorcade is waiting. We need to leave." This time, Trump did not argue. He did not protest. He cast one last, long look at Sergeant Parr, a look of grudging, uncomprehending defeat. Then, he simply turned and began the long, quiet walk back toward the palace gates, his entourage falling into a subdued line behind him. He had been humbled. As Trump's motorcade glided silently away from Buckingham Palace, the profound quiet in the courtyard held for a long time. The tourists didn't immediately break into chatter or rush to their next destination. They stood for a moment, processing what they had witnessed. A teacher was explaining to his students, that guard just won more respect by standing still than most people get by shouting on a stage. An American woman murmured to her husband, "That's the first time I've ever seen him lose an argument." Her husband replied, "No, that's the first time I've seen him realize he was never really in the conversation." The video clips, of course, went viral. But they told a different story than the one Trump had intended to create. They weren't about his power, but about his irrelevance in the face of true discipline. News outlets and social media commentators lauded the guard's epic and classy response. He became an overnight, anonymous symbol of quiet strength, his one line, "This uniform doesn't answer to ego," becoming a global meme for integrity. Back inside the palace, Major Caroline Brooks found Warrant Officer Parr after his shift was over. He was in a small, Spartan break room, carefully cleaning his rifle. "Well handled, Parr," she said simply. Parr looked up, his face once again that of a normal, slightly tired soldier. "Just doing my duty, ma'am." "Your duty," she replied, a rare, small smile touching her lips, today included giving a masterclass in British understatement. "The palace is pleased." For Jonathan Parr, his mission had never changed. It was, and always would be, to stand guard, to be a living symbol of a centuries-old tradition. But the incident had subtly changed his understanding of that mission. He had always known his duty was to be a rock. But that day, he had learned that sometimes, a rock doesn't just endure the waves, it breaks them. He continued his service, his steps just as precise, his gaze just as steady. But now, when tourists looked at him, they saw not just a costume, but a character, a quiet hero who had, with a single sentence, defended the honor of a nation. His new mission was simply to continue being the man he had always been, now knowing that the whole world was watching, and learning. This story reminds us that true power is not always loud. It is not found in demands for respect, but in actions that command it. It's a lesson in the quiet strength of discipline and the profound authority of a duty honorably served. What does real strength look like to you? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of quiet dignity moved you, please like this video, subscribe for more powerful stories, and share it with someone who understands that silence can be the most powerful answer. And comment, duty, to show your respect.